Hey everybody. Sorry it was a little longer than I needed to. I had to take care of some business at home. Blah. What am I doing here? I am switching over, getting some music going. We are going to be working on an image of Douglas Lain of Zero Books. Um, Good to start me off here. But fortunately, it's a quick one, so I should be able to pop this out real quickly here. Get the chat popped out, so in case anybody pops in, says hi, I can respond. There we go. All right. Okay. So, anyways, I have been thinking about how, the story of how I was radicalized. And I think a lot of it has to do, believe it or not, with Image Comics, which I thought would be kind of an interesting discussion. Now, some of you who might know something about comics might be laughing a little bit about this idea, but once I explain it, it makes perfect sense. Especially since, Liefeld tends to be a little more right wing, but like this Image Comics was kind of his idea. I mean, um, don't get me wrong. There was a lot of problems with early Image, and I'm not going to really go into like the details of the personalities, but I kind of find it ironic that a right winger who oh god did some comic about Jesus' death that I hear is just like amazingly awful, but like worth reading because of how interesting it is. Well, I mean, the thing is about Rob Liefeld, as far as his writing goes, it's always like the more interesting stuff is like what's in his head that never actually gets to paper. But anyways, I digress. So the first thing I need to talk a bit about before I really talk about Image Comics is what happened before Image. And just up the street from me, in a town called Northampton, Massachusetts, a bunch of comic creators got together, including Rick Veitch, Scott McCloud, Kevin Eastman, Peter Laird, um, Dave Sim, and probably a few others that I cannot think of off the top of my head. Apologize to those who I happen to forget. But anyways, they had this big meeting, and Scott McCloud, being the Thomas Jefferson of the group, wrote to the creators' Bill of Rights. And basically talking about rights that creators should have for creating comic books and pitches and all this stuff that is very much well duh kind of things. Now, the comic book industry has, mostly through the big two, have kind of kept creators down for the most part. In the late '70s, or early '70s, I'm sorry, late '60s, early '70s, when and I've talked about this before, but when Stan Lee retired, they offered the position of editor in chief of Marvel Comics to Will Eisner, who is the godfather of comics. And Will Eisner said, "I have one demand, and that's to let creators own their creations." And Marvel said, "Well, it was nice talking to you." in the early 80s, there was a big drive to unionize the comic book industry, which creators got pay raises, but they never unionized, and those pay raises stayed for like the next 20 years. Shows you a bit how backwards the comic industry is. So when the Creators Bill of Rights was written in the late 80s, um, it was kind of a big deal. And you can probably draw a direct line, but I'm not going to. That to Image. Now, Image was not meant to be kind of a socialist company, but it kind of was. Um, what's absolutely great about what they are now, and I can't speak to how their deals in the 90s, but they basically, what they do is they have like a fee that they take. That's for printing, publishing, and publishing costs. And then all the rest of the money that the comic earns is yours. So they want your comic to be successful, and they have toolkits to kind of help you. But like advertising's on you, promotions on you. So to work for Image, you kind of have to have the hustle. Not a bad thing. And but the idea that you had a company that was certainly something I should probably look into. But the bottom line is that Dark Horse is a top-down company, and Valiant, not Image, Valiant, the Dark Horse, a good chunk of the publishers out there are really like top-down, kind of prescribed what's happening. Um, even companies, like Fantagraphics, which has really friendly to creators, and I think that's an important distinction right there. Um, it's still a kind of a top-down company, where Image was 7 guys, very different personalities who started off running it. Now, I don't know how many is left in there, but it was more of a cooperative. And me, as a teenager living in Texas, whenever this all happened, never heard of anything quite like this. And between learning about the Creators Bill of Rights and seeing a type of cooperative happening, a lot of my perspectives completely changed. I would say that thanks to Rob Liefeld, I became a socialist. And I'm quite glad that Image became the company that it should have always been, like from when it first started. At first, they were trying to create their own coherent superhero universe. And it's gotten less and less coherent. I mean, take a look at one of my favorite runs of comics. I really like the Wildstorm imprint. If you've ever read any of the you know, Wildstorm was kind of a weak start, but once it got going, it actually got really good. And if you've not read Sleeper, I highly recommend that. But uh, just kind of shows you how hodgepodge and nonsensical the Wildstorm universe is. they actually decided to do something different where they had a crossover with another property, and so they had Stormwatch versus Aliens, and at the end of it, they basically killed off most of the cast, which then allowed Warren Ellis to bring in a bunch of new characters to Stormwatch, and then ended it, and they became the Authority. And if you've not read The Authority, that is a great series with beautiful artwork from Brian Hitch, who you can easily say, created the visuals to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, a lot of what they do is very much inspired by his work there, but that was the interesting thing. Image was able to experiment with stuff like that. And I mean, the Image creators were also able to make a lot of money doing this. Todd McFarlane was able to start up a toy company completely on his own. Will Portacio had a rather sad story. He was his sister got sick, and he ended up having to sell off like his creations to help pay for her medical expenses. Rob Liefeld seems to be doing all right for himself. He got fired from Image, did his own publishing house for a little bit. I think it was a bit BS why he was fired. But I think a lot of it was just egos, and at some point, something like that was going to happen. Because at the time, and this is the problem with people complaining about, forehead. That's great nuance in the shading in the forehead here. I'm a little worried I might not be able to get it translate with the ink. Glasses too. Let's see how the rest of this looks. Not terrible. It'll come together. But I think one of the big legacies of Image is the creative freedom. And Frank Miller, who was the big star of Marvel at the time, basically wrote on his door, "Match it," and left the office. Kind of ironic that a far-right winger like Frank Miller, talking about, his solidarity with the protesters, but there you have it, folks. Ooh. I see the broken line. I don't understand how my pencils can have such, beautiful delicateness to it, and that using the exact same tool my inks, I never feel like I get the same nuance. I mean, there's some strength to the inks that I'm doing here. Don't get me wrong. But I mean, it just never quite works out that way. Let's do. Go back in with the eraser. Tighten it up just a wee bit. Because whenever I use the pencil normally, you can see how all right. Company, but there is a bit of socialism to how they approach their business model. It's not quite a co-op. It's not quite a top-down business. It's unique as far as I know, but I am not an expert on these things. And the comic book industry certainly is unique. That's looking pretty good. Let me drop in one more layer here. Oh, leave on to you. Should go right there. There we go. I wonder what Richard Wolff thinks about really down, you know, business that we're used to seeing. There we go. That's starting to look a little better. Tighten it up a bit. Amazing what a little bit of shading does. There we. I think the ear was a little out of focus from the photo I was working on. All right. I think that means. You know what I should do? I am not done. But I'll start working on those plugs anyways. This is what I always look at the end. I always see something I miss. Usually what I do if I'm working on something professional, I'll actually so what's that? Uh Now I am working on a graphic novel and so please check that out. Hit me up on Twitter if you got any questions or anything like that. And I let this screen go dark. That's okay. Nobody's messaged me anyways. hey, thank you for watching.